A janitor froze as dirty water spilled across the floor she had just cleaned, laughter rising from well-dressed young men as phones lifted to capture her humiliation. Around them, conversations died, shoes paused, and the mall quietly chose not to see. Everyone turned away except one man. Near a vending machine, a stranger set down his coffee. At his feet, a German shepherd stood up. No bark, just presence. The air shifted. Everything began to change. Before we begin, please help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. Your single click truly means more than you know. God bless you for keeping hope alive. Winter pressed against the city with a dull, metallic cold, and the mall breathed its last hour under fluorescent lights that made everything look tired and thin. The shopping center was almost closed, the kind of late hour when footsteps echoed too loudly, and the air smelled of disinfectant and old tile. Hannah Brooks worked the night shift because it paid a little extra and because daylight hours belonged to her younger brother's appointments. She was 26, tall but narrow-shouldered, with a body shaped by long nights of work rather than leisure. Her hair, a soft chestnut brown, was pulled into a low knot that never quite held. Loose strands brushed her neck as she bent to push the mop forward. Her skin was pale from winter and indoor light, faint freckles dusting her forearms like something she could never wash away. She moved carefully, with the practiced economy of someone who knew that every spill meant 10 more minutes before she could go home. The water numbed her fingers until they felt like glass. She did not complain. She rarely did. A group of young men drifted across the atrium with the lazy confidence of people who had nowhere they needed to be and no reason to hurry. Their coats were tailored, shoes clean enough to reflect the ceiling lights, watches catching brief flashes of silver when they laughed. They spoke over one another in voices polished by money and certainty. One of them, broad-shouldered, blonde hair trimmed close, face smooth and unmarked, noticed Hannah the way a child notices a toy left on the floor. He nudged the bucket with his foot, just enough at first to see if anyone would stop him. No one did. The second kick was deliberate. The bucket tipped, water sloshed out in a dirty wave across the tile she had just finished. Laughter followed, sharp and unashamed. "Hey," the blonde one said, smiling as if he were doing her a favor. "You missed a spot." He told her to kneel and clean it again, slow this time, because they were still watching. Phones rose in a neat line, little black mirrors hungry for humiliation. Hannah felt heat flood her face, then drain away, leaving a hollow chill behind her eyes. She had learned the reflex of apology early, the instinct to say sorry even when she had done nothing wrong, but the word stuck in her throat. Her knees ached at the thought of the cold floor. She could hear her brother's voice in her head, the way he asked her if she was tired, the way she always lied. A security guard stood a few meters away, a man in his late 40s with a thinning hairline and a belly that pulled at his uniform. He had a face trained into neutrality by years of not wanting trouble. He shifted his weight and looked toward the closed storefronts, as if the glass mannequins might need him more. A couple crossing the atrium slowed, then sped up, eyes fixed on the exit sign. The mall chose silence. At the far end, near a vending machine humming like an insect, Ethan Walker held a paper cup of the cheapest coffee available. He was 34, tall without being showy, shoulders broad beneath a frayed canvas jacket that had seen better winters. His hair was dark and cut too close, not for style, but for ease, and a short, uneven beard traced the angles of his jaw. There were fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind earned by squinting into distance rather than smiling. His face carried the calm of someone who had learned to read rooms quickly and to move only when it mattered. He stood with his back straight out of habit, boots scuffed, posture still. The Navy had taught him that stillness could be louder than noise, but it had also taught him when not to move. At his feet lay Bear, a German shepherd whose size made strangers step wide without thinking. Bear was 6, black and tan with a heavy chest, and a coat dulled by age and old scars. One hind leg never bent the way it should, the legacy of a collapsed beam during a training exercise years ago. He did not wear a vest or a tag. His ears were upright, eyes amber and intelligent, body arranged in a disciplined quiet that came from long practice. Ethan had found him after the injury. I'll label difficult and intense, a dog trained to work and then set aside when the work broke him. They understood each other without explanation. Ethan watched the phones lift. He watched Hannah's shoulders draw inward, the way people fold when they are being erased in public. A memory stirred, uninvited. Another room, another laugh. The same confidence that cruelty wears when it expects no consequences. He tightened his grip on the cup and forced his breath slow. He had promised himself that he would not step into chaos again, not here, not anywhere that did not wear a uniform. Bear lifted his head before Ethan decided anything, ears angling forward, muscles gathering under his fur. It was not a growl so much as a question. Ethan rested 2 fingers against the collar, the old signal to hold, and the dog froze. Eyes locked, tail low, presence unmistakable. The blond man noticed them, smirked, raised his phone higher, but the laughter came out thinner now. Ethan did not move or speak. He set the cup down, the sound carried. Bear rose, not fast, not aggressive, just up, and the air changed. Phones dipped. Someone swallowed. Hannah's breath caught. Ethan stood where he was, angled just enough to be between her and them. The lights hummed, the water spread across the floor, reflecting the dog's silhouette like a dark question. The mall had chosen silence before. Now it was choosing something else, though it did not yet know what to call it. The mall did not explode into confrontation the way Hannah's body expected it to. Instead, the moment dissolved into procedure. Voices lowered, phones slipped back into pockets. The blond man said something under his breath that sounded like a joke, only meant for his friends, and they drifted away with the same careless confidence they had arrived with. The water on the floor was mopped up by someone else. The night resumed its slow crawl toward closing, as if nothing important had happened. Hannah stood where she was told to stand, hands still damp, pulse still racing, her breath shallow and uneven. She had always known that harm did not need to be loud to be effective. Silence, she was learning, could be sharper. She was called aside by the mall manager near a service corridor that smelled faintly of cardboard and cleaning solution. Tom Keller was in his late 50s, short and slightly stooped, with thinning gray hair combed flat as if trying not to take up space. He wore a pressed shirt and an expression practiced for difficult conversations that were never meant to change anything. His voice was low, polite, and cold at the edges. He did not ask Hannah how she was. He told her not to make a big deal out of it, that the customers involved were important, that misunderstandings happened late at night when people were tired. He said the word misunderstanding the way one might say weather, something unavoidable and not worth arguing with. Hannah nodded because nodding was safer than speaking. Inside, something brittle cracked. She thought of her brother's medication schedule, of the rent notice folded in her locker, of how quickly dignity could be traded for quiet. But the report was written before Hannah finished drying her hands. The security guard, Mark Jensen, mid-40s, square jaw softening into jowls, eyes that slid away from conflict, typed with practiced speed. His account was clean and efficient. No mention of phones, no mention of laughter, no mention of the order to kneel. He described raised voices, a tense atmosphere, a large dog that made people uncomfortable. When Hannah tried to speak, Mark did not look up. He said he would add a note if needed, then printed the page and slid it across the counter for a signature. She did not sign. He shrugged as if that too were weather. Ethan was approached near the exit, where the automatic doors sighed open and closed with each passing body. The assistant manager, Rachel Lynn, early 30s, slim, dark hair cut into a precise bob, our eyes alert with the constant calculation of risk, kept her tone professional. She asked him to take the dog outside for safety reasons. She did not say whose safety. She said policies existed for a reason and that things would be easier if he complied. Ethan listened, face unreadable. He clipped the leash, nodded once, and led Bear into the cold. Outside, the night swallowed sound. Bear's breath fogged the air. Ethan rested a hand against the dog's neck and felt the steady thrum beneath fur and scar. He thought of rules and how often they protected the wrong people. Back inside, Hannah was told her night shift was suspended pending review. The phrase sounded temporary, almost kind, until Tom Keller explained that the review might take time and that day shifts were already covered. It was said gently, as if gentleness could soften the arithmetic of lost hours. Hannah asked how long. Tom said he would call. He did not meet her eyes. She gathered her things with fingers that shook despite her effort to still them. The locker door closed with a small metallic click that felt louder than the laughter had been. The mall returned to normal with alarming speed. Floors shone, lights dimmed in sequence. A family passed through, laughing about dinner plans. Hannah stepped into the cold with her coat unbuttoned, the night biting at her wrists. She stood for a moment under the awning, staring at the parking lot where cars idled and pulled away, carrying people back to lives uninterrupted. Her phone buzzed. A message from her brother asked if she was coming home soon. She typed yes and deleted it. Typed yes again and sent it. She did not know how to explain the hollow weight pressing at her chest, the sense that she had been erased without leaving a mark. Ethan watched from across the lot, leaning against his truck, Bear sitting close at his heel. He saw Hannah pause, saw the way she squared her shoulders before walking, the way people do when they decide not to fall apart in public. He told himself to leave. He told himself that intervening had already gone far enough, that the system had spoken and would not be argued with tonight. He started the engine, then turned it off. Bear looked up, ears pricked, waiting. Ethan thought of the word misunderstanding and how often it was used to bury truth. He stayed where he was as the mall lights flickered and went dark, the building settling back into its careful quiet, unchanged in every visible way. Morning came gray and undecided, the kind of winter light that never fully commits to being day. Ethan loaded the last of his things into the truck with movements that were automatic, practiced. Leaving had always been easier than staying. Towns like this pressed in on him, the quiet pretending to be peace, the rules pretending to be neutral. He had learned long ago how to pack without thinking and drive until the edges of a place blurred into something else. Bear waited beside the open door, breath steady, eyes following Ethan's hands. The dog sensed the ritual even when Ethan tried not to name it. On the way out of the lot, Ethan slowed. Across the drive, Hannah Brooks pushed a dented janitor's cart through thin snow, the wheels catching and squealing in protest. She wore the same worn coat as the night before. He unbuttoned at the wrists, sleeves a touch too long. Her hair was loose now, chestnut strands falling into her face because there was no uniform rule left to hold it back. She looked smaller in daylight, though not weaker, just newly exposed. She stopped at the service entrance, set the cart aside, and stood there a moment longer than necessary, as if hoping the building might say something back. It didn't. Ethan watched her turn away, shoulders set, jaw tight, and something in him resisted the familiar pull of the road. Farther down the block, a woman slept curled against a brick wall beneath a broken awning. She was elderly, late 70s maybe, short and slight, with silver hair pinned into a bun that had come loose overnight. Her name, Ethan would later learn, was Mrs. Alvarez. She wore a thin cardigan over a nightgown, eye slippers soaked through, hands folded together as if still holding on to warmth that wasn't there. A paper notice lay crumpled beside her. A lock change, a missed payment, a polite explanation printed in small type. Ethan killed the engine and crossed the street. He knelt, spoke softly, offered his jacket. Her eyes opened, sharp despite the cold, measuring him the way a lifetime of caution teaches you to do. She accepted the jacket without thanks, pride intact, fear tucked carefully away. Behind the building, near the dumpsters, Ethan caught a glimpse of last night's guard. Mark Jensen stood with his back half-turned, shoulders hunched, accepting a thick envelope from a man Ethan didn't recognize. It was done quickly, hands barely touching, a nod exchanged like a password. Mark's face held the tired relief of someone who had convinced himself that this was how things worked. Ethan did not confront him. He noted the detail and let it settle, another weight added to a scale he was trying not to balance. Ethan stayed. He did not announce it. He fixed the broken lock on Mrs. Alvarez's door with tools pulled from the truck bed, hands moving with quiet competence. She watched him from a kitchen chair, chin lifted, eyes tracking Bear, as the dog positioned himself between the open door and the hall, a sentry without instruction. Mrs. Alvarez brewed coffee on a stove that rattled when it lit, insisting Ethan take a cup. He drank it standing, thanked her, left the jacket folded on the counter. The next call came from a man named Paul Henley, early 60s, once broad-shouldered, now bent by years of factory work and a heart that skipped under stress. Paul's voice shook as he asked for a ride to the clinic across town. Ethan drove without comment. Paul talked too much in the passenger seat, apologizing for the smell of oil on his coat, for taking up space. Bear lay across the back seat, solid and calm, the steady presence doing what reassurance couldn't. By afternoon, word moved the way it always did, sideways and quiet. A porch light replaced, groceries left at a door with no knock, a snowed-in walkway cleared before anyone asked. Ethan never stayed long. He did not give his name unless pressed. He did not accept thanks. He had learned the cost of being known. Bear followed, the limp more visible now that daylight showed everything, but his focus never wavered. Children watched from windows, and an old man down the block nodded once, a small acknowledgement that meant more than words. As evening fell, Ethan returned to the lot behind the mall, parking where he could see the service entrance. Hannah emerged with a cardboard box, smaller than Ethan expected, the kind that holds the sum of a life reduced to what can be carried. She moved with care, as if afraid something might spill. When she noticed the truck, she hesitated. Their eyes met across the distance. Ethan lifted a hand. Not a wave, just a brief acknowledgement. She nodded back, a flicker of something like relief crossing her face before she looked away. He did not approach. He understood the need to keep dignity intact, to accept help without having it announced. Night came early. The temperature dropped. Lights blinked on one by one in the apartment building across the street. Bear took his place near the entrance, sitting, watching, ears catching every sound. Ethan leaned against the truck, hands tucked into his jacket, breath fogging the air. He thought of promises and how they were made to survive, not to be comfortable. He thought of Hannah pushing the cart through snow, of Mrs. Alvarez's steady gaze, of the envelope changing hands behind the building. He did not frame it as a decision. He simply did not leave. From the windows above, a few faces lingered longer than before, eyes following the man and the dog who had stayed. Hannah did not plan to investigate anything. At first, she was only trying to make sense of the quiet that followed her suspension, the way her days suddenly stretched without structure. She sat at the small kitchen table in the apartment she shared with her brother, winter light slanting through blinds that never quite closed straight. The table still smelled faintly of bleach from her work clothes. She opened her old planner out of habit and began marking canceled shifts, then noticed how often certain names appeared together. Supervisors rotating at odd hours, guards reassigned minutes before incidents, maintenance slots shortened without explanation. The pattern did not announce itself. It waited. Hannah had always been observant. Our cleaning had taught her that what mattered most was not the dirt you could see, but the residue that stayed after. She returned to the mall during the day, not as an employee, but as someone invisible. Without a uniform, she blended in. She watched from benches and food court tables, listening. A former co-worker, Denise Parker, early 40s, sturdy build, hair dyed a careful auburn, sat beside her with a coffee and spoke in half sentences. Denise's hand shook when she talked about a paper she had been told to sign after a fall in the stockroom, a voluntary separation printed with too many legal words. She described another janitor who had slipped on an unmarked spill weeks earlier and never came back. The accident, Denise said, had been real. The paperwork afterward had not. Hannah wrote names in the margins of her planner and felt a tightening in her chest that was equal parts fear and clarity. The more she looked, the more she found. Incident logs referenced repairs that had never been made. Security schedules shifted without notice on nights when something went wrong. Maintenance orders were stamped complete, though the problems persisted. She found text messages she had saved without knowing why. Short directives sent late, reminders to keep quiet, assurances that everything would be handled. She spread the papers across the table, edges curling, coffee rings blooming like evidence stains. It was worse than any floor she had scrubbed because it pretended to be clean. Hannah understood then that the mess was intentional. It had been designed to look like nothing. Ethan listened when she brought the papers to the truck that evening, Bear sitting watch near the curb, eyes tracking passers-by. He did not interrupt. He did not ask her to slow down. He looked at the dates, the signatures, the gaps. His face remained calm, but his jaw set in a way Hannah recognized as decision. He said quietly that systems learn how to protect themselves and that pressure does not always come from above. Sometimes it arrives sideways, wearing a badge or a clipboard. He told her about places where danger hid behind routine, where harm wore the language of policy. A battlefield isn't always loud, he said, voice low. Sometimes it's paperwork. Hannah felt the weight of the words settle. She had been fighting exhaustion, not realizing it was strategy. And a new name surfaced as Hannah traced the threads. Holt Security Services. She noticed the logo on guard jackets, the same logo on invoices marked approved by management. She asked around and met Caleb Wright, a maintenance contractor in his early 30s, with grease permanently etched into his nails and a thin scar along his cheek from a forklift mishap years ago. Caleb was lean, restless, with eyes that flicked toward cameras even when none were visible. He spoke carefully, saying he had seen guards arrive before accidents were reported and leave before ambulances did. He said he kept his head down because he needed the work. He said the scar had taught him how quickly injuries became liabilities. Hannah thanked him and wrote Holt's name again, heavier this time. That night, Ethan and Bear walked the perimeter of the apartment building as they had begun to do. The cold sharpened every sound. Bear paused near the service alley, nose lifting, body angling toward the dark as if measuring distance. Ethan followed the line of the dog's attention and saw a familiar silhouette by the dumpsters, the same man who had handed Mark Jensen the envelope days earlier. The exchange did not happen this time. The presence alone felt like a reminder. Ethan did not approach. He catalogued. He knew the value of patience, of letting patterns reveal themselves without interference. From an upstairs window, a light flicked on and then off. The building breathed uneasy. Hannah lay awake later, papers stacked neatly now, fear threading through resolve. She thought of Denise's shaking hands, of Caleb's careful words, or of her brother asleep in the next room. She understood what silence had bought them so far and what it would cost to keep paying. In the morning, she would speak to one more person. She did not yet know who, only that the choice had already been made. If she stayed quiet, nothing would change. If she didn't, something might break open. Outside, Bear settled near the door, a steady presence against the dark. Hannah closed her eyes and held the thought that had finally named itself. Some stains are meant to be seen. B. Snow fell thick and relentless that night, softening edges while hiding danger beneath its quiet. The mall pushed toward the holidays with forced cheer, crews working late to finish decorations that glittered more than they were secured. Metal trusses were hoisted into place above the atrium, lights tested and retested, schedules signed off in ink that meant little beyond compliance. On paper, everything was approved. In practice, shortcuts lived in the seams. Hannah felt it when she stepped inside to drop off a document she had forgotten, an unease she could not name, the way floors sometimes felt wrong before a spill. The atrium was busier than it had been in weeks. Families lingered despite the cold, children tugging at gloves, faces tilted up toward the lights. A temporary supervisor named Grant Holloway, mid-30s, angular face, a close-cropped beard, eyes sharp with ambition, paced beneath the rigging with a tablet in hand. He spoke fast, cutting corners with confidence, reminding the crew they were behind. Grant had learned that speed looked like competence when no one wanted to ask questions. He signed off on the last checklist without looking up. Above him, a bolt sat loose where a washer should have been, invisible against the glare. The sound came without warning. Not a crack, but a blunt, tearing impact that swallowed conversation whole. Steel dropped into the open space, the truss folding as gravity claimed it. Lights shattered, dust bloomed. People screamed and ran, some freezing mid-step, as if the rules of movement had changed. A child fell, knocked off balance by the surge. Hannah felt herself pushed backward and then forward again, instinct dragging her toward the noise. She saw blood on a sleeve and turned her head away, heart hammering, breath gone thin. Ethan was already moving. He did not wait for instructions because there was no time for them. The training that had taught him restraint had also taught him when to break it. He ran into the atrium as others ran out, boots slipping on the wet tile, shoulders braced for impact. Bear surged beside him, body low and powerful despite the limp, eyes fixed on motion and sound. Smoke stung. A beam lay across the floor, sparking where wires had torn free. Ethan lifted one end just enough to make space, muscles burning, teeth clenched against the strain. He heard a child crying, high, panicked, and followed it without thinking. Bear reached the child first, a boy of about 7 with dark curls plastered to his forehead, eyes wide with shock. The dog nudged, then gripped the back of the boy's jacket with practiced care, pulling him clear inch by inch. Ethan shielded them, turning his body to take the worst of falling debris. The boy slid free and stumbled into Hannah's arms as she dropped to her knees, holding him tight, whispering words she barely remembered learning. Behind them, another section groaned. Ethan shouted a warning that disappeared into the roar. Bear pivoted to return, drawn by another sound, and that was when the steel shifted. The impact was heavy and final in a way Ethan would remember long after. A metal bar came down across Bear's back, pinning the dog against the snow that had blown in through the shattered doors. The sound Bear made was short and surprised, more breath than pain. He went still. Ethan was there in a heartbeat, hands shaking as he levered the bar aside, skin burning where metal scraped through fabric. He pressed his palms against Bear's fur, felt warmth, and then the fear that came with not feeling enough. Around them, the atrium stood stunned. People watched, some stepping forward at last, others rooted where they were, seeing finally who ran in and who had turned away before. Sirens cut through the chaos as sprinklers hissed to life, misting ash and light across the wreckage. Grant Holloway stood pale and unmoving near the wall, tablet forgotten at his feet, the certainty drained from his face. Security arrived too late to matter. Paramedics pushed through, voices sharp and practiced, lifting Bear onto a stretcher with care that bordered on reverence. Ethan stayed with him, one hand steady on the dog's shoulder, speaking low, the way you speak when you need someone to stay. Hannah watched from a few steps back, The boy safe against his mother now, the image burning into her mind. Steel on snow, silence broken by courage. When the last injured person was accounted for, the atrium felt smaller, as if the walls had leaned in to witness what had been revealed. Phones were out again, but this time they recorded something different. Hands lifting debris, bodies shielding strangers, a dog who had not hesitated. Snow kept falling outside, blanketing the entrance where Bear had lain moments before. People stood in that quiet understanding at last the cost of their earlier silence. It was not abstract. It had weight and breath and blood-warm fur. The mall lights flickered and steadied. Nothing else felt steady at all. The video did not arrive all at once. It surfaced in fragments, angles caught by trembling hands, audio layered with breath and fear, a blur of steel and snow, and a dog moving where people hesitated. By morning, those fragments had found one another. The clip of Bear pulling the child free, Ethan bracing the beam the moment the metal fell. Each piece stitched together by strangers who recognized something true and refused to let it be buried. The mall's name trended for reasons no marketing team could soften. Comment sections filled with timestamps and questions. The story, once isolated to a quiet atrium, stepped into daylight and did not look away. Witnesses followed the footage. Not one, but many. A mother described how her son had been pulled from under falling lights by a man she could not name at the time. So a college student admitted he had filmed the chaos instead of helping, then returned days later to explain what he saw before the fall. Workers rushed, warnings dismissed, a supervisor signing off without checking. Denise Parker came forward with her hands steadier than Hannah remembered, her auburn hair pulled back tight, her voice firm as she spoke about the paper she had been forced to sign after an injury. Caleb Wright sent photographs of maintenance requests marked complete beside hazards left untouched. Each account added weight. Each voice made the silence harder to justify. The investigation opened with a sound that carried authority. Clipboards on desks, unfamiliar badges at the door. Lead investigator Laura Mendel arrived from the county office, mid-40s, tall and composed, salt and pepper hair cut blunt at the shoulders. But her face bore the calm severity of someone who had learned not to promise outcomes, only process. She listened without interruption, eyes steady, pen moving only when something mattered. Within days, management was placed on administrative leave pending review. Holt Security Services was notified of a parallel inquiry. Documents were requested, timelines reconstructed, signatures compared. The language shifted from misunderstanding to negligence, from policy to responsibility. Hannah received the call while sitting at her kitchen table, papers still stacked neatly, as if order itself might protect her. The Human Resources Director spoke carefully, offering reinstatement and back pay, an apology written by counsel and read without inflection. Hannah accepted, not because the words felt sufficient, but because accepting changed the shape of what came next. When she returned to the building for a meeting, she wore a simple coat and carried herself with a steadiness she had earned. The room felt different. Chairs faced her. People waited. She answered questions plainly, neither shrinking nor posturing, and left with a sense that the floor beneath her feet had finally stopped shifting. At the veterinary hospital across town, Bear lay under bright lights, bandaged and breathing. The surgeon, Dr. Elaine Porter, early 50s, compact build, hands precise from decades of work, spoke in clear terms. The impact had been severe, but the spine was spared. Surgery would be long, recovery longer. Ethan listened without flinching, the way he did when information needed to be held steady. He stayed through the night, one hand resting against Bear's shoulder when aloud, whispering the same low words he had used in the atrium. When Bear's tail thumped once, weak but deliberate, the room exhaled. Survival did not erase cost, but it made hope practical. Back at the mall, the janitorial staff gathered for the first time without being summoned. They stood together near the service corridor, a line of bodies that had learned how to disappear and now refused. Some were older, backs bent by years of work. Others were new, eyes sharp with the relief of not being alone. They spoke quietly at first, about schedules changed without notice, about injuries logged and lost. But the quiet did not mean fear anymore. It meant focus. When a guard passed, he slowed, then nodded. The balance had shifted. Truth no longer stood by itself. Ethan did not address the crowd. He did not give interviews. He repaired what he could, drove where he was needed, and waited at the hospital when there was nothing to do but wait. Hannah visited Bear with a folded blanket and a note she did not read aloud. Laura Mendel returned for follow-ups, her questions narrowing, her presence steady. The mall reopened sections cautiously, tape still marking where steel had fallen. People moved differently now, glancing up, noticing. Fear had not vanished. It had changed sides. The stories continued to surface, not as spectacle, but as record. And in that steady accumulation, the truth found company at last. Morning arrived clean and deliberate, the kind of light that doesn't apologize for being seen. The mall opened under new management with doors that felt less like thresholds and more like invitations. The atrium smelled of fresh coffee instead of disinfectant. And the floors, once a ledger of shortcuts, held a steady shine that came from time taken rather than time stolen. Hannah Brooks walked in for her first morning shift in years with her shoulders square and her pace unhurried. She wore her hair tied back simply, chestnut strands neat without being tight, freckles visible on forearms she no longer tried to hide. She did not scan the room for exits. She met eyes. Some people nodded first, others followed. The new operations director, Marlene Ortiz, stood near the service desk greeting staff by name. Marlene was in her early 50s, too tall, with iron-gray hair worn loose to the collar and a posture that suggested she had learned authority without theatrics. Her voice carried warmth without softness, and she listened more than she spoke. She welcomed Hannah with a brief smile and a straightforward welcome back. No speeches, no qualifiers. The schedule on the wall showed full shifts restored. Training sessions were listed. Maintenance checks were dated and initialed twice. The changes were not loud, but they were structural, and people felt them underfoot. Ethan Walker arrived early, toolbox in hand, paperwork signed the week before, without ceremony. He had accepted the maintenance position because it made sense, and because staying had quietly become a choice he owned. He wore the same frayed canvas jacket, beard trimmed but still uneven, eyes steady as ever. The job fit him. Problems to diagnose, fixes that mattered, the satisfaction of things holding because you made them hold. He moved through the building with the calm economy that had once kept him alive elsewhere, now repurposed to keep others safe. He spoke little. When asked, he explained plainly. Trust grew in the spaces where explanations ended and results remained. Bear took his place by the main entrance each morning, lying on the mat with the dignity of a sentry who understood routine. He was leaner now, fur along his back parted by a clean scar that caught the light and did not apologize for it. At 6, he moved more carefully, the limp a permanent negotiation rather than a flaw. He wore no leash. He did not bark. He watched. Children approached slowly, palms open, and learned how gentleness works when it is returned. Some adults adjusted their steps without thinking, straightening as they passed, as if remembering something they had nearly forgotten. The mall found a new rhythm. People said hello to Hannah by name. They asked how her brother was doing, and she answered without rehearsing gratitude. The janitorial staff worked in pairs now, schedules posted openly, incident logs kept where anyone could read them. Denise Parker laughed once, surprised by the sound, and did not apologize for it. Caleb Wright fixed a faulty rail and filed a report that stayed filed. Laura Mendel's follow-up visits became shorter, her questions narrower, the work of accountability moving from urgent to ordinary. The best kind of outcome. Ethan kept to his tasks. He replaced a washer where it mattered, tightened bolts until metal sang the right note, marked dates that would mean something later. He shared a coffee with Marlene one afternoon, a brief exchange about weather and timing, nothing more. Hannah watched him from the corridor, recognizing the particular ease of someone who had stopped bracing for departure. When their paths crossed, they spoke of practical things, filters, supplies, a door that stuck, then stood a moment longer than necessary, comfortable with the pause. It was enough. As weeks settled, the story changed shape. It was told not as spectacle, but as lesson, passed to new hires and neighbors alike. People remembered the night steel fell, but they remembered the morning after more. They remembered who stepped forward, who learned to speak, who stayed. On a quiet afternoon, sunlight traced the floor in long rectangles. And Bear lifted his head as Hannah crossed the atrium, mop steady in her hands. She did not lower her gaze. Ethan looked up from a panel and met her smile. Outside, the city went on, imperfect and loud. Inside, the work continued, clean, visible, shared. No one remembered the person who cleaned the floors at night, not at first. They remembered later when they learned how easy it had been to look away. What they remembered most was simpler. A man who refused to turn his back, a dog who refused to quit, and a morning that proved standing together could change the shape of a place. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder. They come quietly, through people who choose not to turn away. The Bible tells us faith can move mountains. But in everyday life, God often works through ordinary acts of courage, kindness, and compassion. A choice to stay, a voice that speaks, a heart that refuses to look away. If this story touched you, remember, one small act can change someone's life. You don't have to be a hero. You just have to care. May God bless you and your family, protect the vulnerable in your life, and give you strength to stand for what is right. If this message gave you hope, please share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing stories that restore faith. God bless you.